All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our breakout session on the role of core curriculum materials and standards implementation. Next slide. My name is Morgan Polikoff. I'm going to moderate this session. I'm a co-director of CSAIL. I'm an associate professor of education at the USC Rasir School of Education. My co-moderator for this panel is Shira Korn, who is a PhD student who works with me in education policy, soon to be finishing up her dissertation, focusing on how parents use accountability data in education. Shira is going to be monitoring the questions that you ask and will be feeding those questions to us in the second portion of the panel. Next slide. So in terms of logistics, the audio is muted, so we've muted attendees for the duration of the session, but that doesn't mean that we're not interested in hearing what you have to say. We just are hoping that you can ask questions using the questions box, which is on the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Shira will be monitoring and posing your questions to the panelists, so please do pose questions there throughout. Also, there is closed captioning available. The live captioning is available at the URL there, and use the gear icon in the live captioning window to change the font size and more. And next slide. And also, just so you know, my husband is also on a Zoom conversation in the other room, so this is as far apart as we can get in the house, so there might be the teensiest bit of background noise from him. I apologize for that, but these are the realities of life under the pandemic. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our panel. So panelists, you're welcome to turn your cameras on at this point. So Julia Kaufman is a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation. Julia is currently leading the RAND American Instructional Resources Survey, which is gathering nationally representative data from U.S. Teachers and school leaders about how they use curriculum materials in the classroom and factors connected to their use of curricula and other instructional materials. And I note that it was either yesterday or the day before they released some COVID-specific survey results. So informing, providing important evidence in real time. So thank you very much. Julia, welcome. Rachael Bradshaw is currently the Senior Director of Literacy and Humanities at the Tennessee Department of Education. So until January, she was with the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. She's originally from Honolulu, began her career as a high school teacher in Boston, and holds a doctorate in educational leadership and policy. Hi, Rachael. Kat Still is the Executive Director of ALPA 21, an English language proficiency assessment system supported by member states and housed at CREST. Prior to joining the team at CREST, Kat worked as Program Director for ALPA 21 at the Council of Chief State School Officers. Hi, Kat. And Kate Watts is an elementary school principal in the Monson School District in Massachusetts. She was previously the Director of Curriculum for the district, where she coordinated the Title I, English Language Learner, and Educator Mentoring and Induction programs for the district. And she previously taught Spanish and served as a reading specialist and ELA teacher in the district. So I've invited everyone to first to open this up with 2 to 3 minutes of their thoughts about the role of the curriculum materials, core curriculum materials, and standards implementation. So we're just going to go in the order in which I introduce people. So Julia, if you would like to unmute yourself, you're welcome to go first.
Yep, thank you so much, Morgan. I'm a senior policy researcher at RAND, and I've been doing research on curriculum implementation for about 15 years or so, first as a postdoctoral fellow and now as a policy researcher at RAND. And I think one of my big early takeaways from this research is that teachers can take the exact same curriculum materials and plan a lesson that looks very different, depending on what messages or supports they get from their districts, what activities they choose to focus on, what they choose to modify, what other materials they bring into their lesson. And not only will that lesson look very different in the planning stages, but even teachers' lesson plans can end up looking very different in the enactment stage because of so many different reasons. Just how the students handle the task, how they've been prepared all year to handle the task, how they've been prepared in previous years to handle the task, and how the teacher reacts in real time to be able to support them. So that's why I'm not surprised we had so much mixed research on whether mere adoption of curriculum or textbooks actually makes a difference for student learning. Because our research suggests that what matters is not just the curriculum, it's how the teacher views and uses the curriculum, how the teacher's district or school supports its use, the kind of professional development they get, and the students in the room, and whether the curriculum addresses all their learning needs. And now remote learning today adds another variable to the mix. And I fully expect that teachers' use of curriculum will be even more variable and diverse in this challenging time, especially because we're already seeing that district messages on how much of the curriculum can be used are variable and diverse. And so Morgan mentioned that we're doing a lot of survey research. I'm leading the RAND American Instructional Resources Survey that is trying to dig deeper into how teachers and school leaders across the United States are using curriculum. And we have national samples of teachers and principals, as well as state level samples with 11 partner states. And these states have been so useful to us in helping us think about what questions to ask and how to get at the questions that will really help them support teachers and schools better.
All right, thank you very much. Next up for opening remarks, I'm going to turn to Rachael.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As I was trying to figure out how to condense the role of curricular materials in standards implementation into a 3-minute dialogue here, I think I've decided that the best way I can sum up how I would put it is that curriculum really shows us, or curricular materials rather, really show us what the standards we're trying to implement are and what they are not. So to take that first point to how curriculum shows us what standards are, in both states I've worked in, Tennessee and Massachusetts, there's been enormous demand from educators for what I call kind of an exegesis of the standards, right? What does this really mean? Can you give us commentary? Can you give us examples? What do these expectations in the standards that are fairly abstract look like in real life practice? And that's an understandable demand, right? Just to quote one representative standard in high school ELA, says determine the theme or central idea of a text and analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details. So that's a lot, and teachers want to know what that looks like for them and for students. I think what curriculum does for them, one thing curriculum does for teachers, curriculum materials, is show them that, right? More than any abstract commentary that a state can provide about, like, this is how we're using this word in the standards, or this is what we really mean. Curriculum really shows how the standards can come to life if it's good and if it's aligned to standards, obviously. So I think a lot of time when people are asking for kind of standards clarification guides type of resources, it's really a good curriculum that would really help them understand the standards best. I also made the claim, though, that curriculum shows us what standards are not. When I say that, I'm thinking of a principal in Massachusetts who, at the start of our campaign there for improving curricular quality and alignment to standards, said to me, but I don't want my teachers working with curriculum. I want my teachers working directly with the standards and translating those into instruction. And my response was kind of yes and, right? Because yes, but there's, I think, a common notion that it's a pretty quick leap from standards to instruction. And it's really not. That's a whole full-time job in there, and that's developing curriculum, creating coherent, comprehensive curriculum that organizes the standards, that makes them accessible to all the students in the room. It's an enormous task. And so while there is a model in which teachers are responsible for that task, as well as implementing curriculum, I think that model requires teachers to have a ton of time, a ton of intellectual bandwidth, because just implementing is a very sophisticated and taxing job in itself, and the ability to coordinate very closely across grade levels to ensure vertical alignment. So it's hard. I think just looking at curriculum products out there and their sheer bulk, how much they have to them, helps make the point that often needs to be made that standards are not curriculum, standards are outcomes, and it's curriculum that really organizes the standards into instruction. The last thing I want to recognize really quick to echo some of the earlier speakers is just that although a lot of my efforts at the state level have focused on strengthening curricular materials and their implementation, that is not a silver bullet any more than standards-based performance, right? So both Massachusetts and Tennessee are taking very comprehensive, systematic approaches, aligning curriculum and standards to assessment, to teacher and leader evaluation, to teacher and leader preparation, family engagement, professional learning, all kinds of things. And that's absolutely essential.
All right, thank you very much. Next up, I'm going to turn it to Kat.
Thanks, Morgan, and good morning or afternoon, everyone. I speak from the perspective of English learners and including English learners in instruction and assessment. So I would echo Julia and Rachel both in that the impacts of how the standards are implemented does have a big effect from how curriculum is used and the quality of that curriculum. So from my perspective, speaking about the role of curriculum and curriculum materials in supporting English learners' mastery of those standards, we feel the curriculum should be just that, supporting. We shouldn't be asking English learners to know more and demonstrate more than their non-EL peers, for example. Therefore, the standards to which we hold these English learners should reflect the language demands in their content area classrooms, scaffolded to align with the language proficiency level of the English learner. The curriculum should then support the diverse needs of these English learners and allow them to access classroom content and make meaning. So for example, students studying the Civil War. Non-EL students are required to read 3 sources of information and create a 3 to 5 minute oral presentation with slides or other visuals. The curriculum could support English learners by suggesting alternate pathways to access the material and participate in classroom activities. This is critical. English learners would be allowed to read sources, for example, in their home language, or have English sources translated or read aloud, depending on the student's proficiency level. These oral presentations that English learners do could be adapted to allow more visuals or a graphic organizer versus a full 3 to 5 minute spoken presentation. Or another option would be to allow the student to deliver the presentation in their home language. Thus, we can meet standards-based goals, such as learning about the Civil War, and use curriculum to differentiate the way learning is accessed and demonstrated based on the proficiency level. And this ties back to what Nelson spoke to in the opening session about the key around standards and curriculum, especially for English learners, is in that differentiation of instruction. So the target's the same, and the instruction should not be more or less, but should instead be different to help English learners meet the same target as non-EL peers. And that's how standards and curriculum can partner to support English learners in the classroom.
Great, thank you. And last but certainly not least, Principal Watts, who I realize I introduced correctly, but has the wrong information there on the slide, so I apologize for that.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. My lens is that of a practitioner in a school, and I think about the journey that our district has taken. 6 years ago, we did not have common assessment. We did not have any kind of curricular materials that that spoke vertically or horizontally in our entire district. And we're a very small rural district, and so we were kind of grabbing at whatever we could to make meaning, to have opportunities for teachers to engage in learning about so many of the intricacies of the standards. And so what we tried to do is we did what a lot of districts do. We use professional learning communities. We leveraged the educator evaluation tool and all the opportunities that the state afforded us as well to be able to engage in deep conversations as professionals. And I think that being able to do that allowed the teachers to really live and breathe the work. And I think that caused them, as well as all of us, to be shoulder to shoulder learning together over the last several years. And so I just think that even though it's difficult work, and of course there's always going to be barriers, increasingly because of the world in which we're living right now, I think that there is such potential when educators work together and have the support that they need. So I guess that would be what I offer.
All right, thank you all for your comments. There was a lot of, I think, consistency in what you heard across those comments, which is nice. So before I get to some questions that I have planned, I thought I would just get a sense of who is in the room. So I'm going to launch a poll. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to respond to this. But just so we know who is here, so we can sort of maybe think about that as we're crafting our questions and answers. All right, I'm going to share those results just so we have them. We have some echo there on, I think, probably one of our panelists. Okay, so we can see that it looks like about 40% are practitioners, teachers or administrators, a large proportion of others. So I'm going to guess maybe those are parents, but I'm not sure. I'm genuinely curious what all the others are, and then about 10% of researchers. Okay, so that's very helpful. Largely a practitioner and an other audience. Okay, so with that context in mind, I am going to start with a few questions, and then, as we said, please also put your questions in the question box, and Shira is monitoring those, and we will turn it over to those questions at some point. So I'm going to start with Kate, actually. So Kate, there can be a tension between providing teachers with specific curriculum guidance, but giving them the autonomy to implement curriculum that works best for their students. So what strategies or policies do you think work best for sort of threading this needle? Kate, you're muted.
Thank you. Sorry. There's a range of approaches when it comes to curriculum implementation when it's determined at the local level. It can be impacted by the culture and climate of the district, the level of educator experience, and the needs of the students. In my experience, as I alluded to before, we really have tried to carve out pockets of time for teachers to engage in ongoing deep dives into curriculum and into the standards. And so we have worked to create vertical teams as well as grade level teams to explore components of the early literacy standards, mathematics, science, technology, social, emotional competency standards, etc. And the teams employ an inquiry-based model, and it's a cycle. And so they'll engage in a deep dive of a standard, for example, speaking and listening, and the role of student discourse, and they'll develop lessons and assessments to implement that standard instructionally. And then formative data is used and analyzed by the team to plan ongoing instruction. So in terms of policies, the district in which I work, we do emphasize adherence to the state standards. However, the PLC model helps to allow for teachers to engage in conversations about the practice and using district purchase curriculum products, and also additional teacher developed teaching materials and techniques. And so that's kind of how we go about it. We try to sustain this culture of trust and collective inquiry, which allows this model to work for us. And we recognize that there are barriers, and we're very honest, and we get those barriers discussed, and we try to, again, use that model of collaboration and consultation to be able to work together. So I don't know if there's anything else I would want to add to that, but obviously, like, if any of the other participants want to add to anything that's said, they're more than welcome.
Absolutely. Others on the panel, Rachael, I see your hand up, so feel free to chime in and add to that.
Yeah, the only thing I'd love to say is just that the curriculum materials themselves can vary a lot in the degree to which they respect teachers' autonomy and professional judgment, right? So there's a huge difference between a kind of script trying to be teacher-proof model and a curriculum that really says, all right, given your expertise and given the students in front of you, here are some options. This is how you can use your professional judgment and expertise to make this material work for your students. So just choosing a curriculum that actually does that can be super helpful.
Okay. So thank you. So Julia, so our study focuses on math and ELA. I think you've heard probably the most about math today. And you know, math and ELA are maybe the two subjects where curriculum materials may be the most developed. I wonder if you know anything about whether there are specific curriculum needs that vary by subject. Are there subject areas that you think need more attention in terms of curriculum or curriculum research or grade levels? What do you think about that?
Yes, I think you're totally right that a lot of the curriculum research that has been done is in math and some in ELA, very little in science or social studies. We have some evidence that teachers' use of curriculum varies quite a bit according to subject area and grade level. For the American Instructional Resources Survey, we're collecting data on ELA, math, again, and science, which is a new subject area for us to gather data on. And what we're seeing is that in ELA and science, for example, teachers tend to use a lot of their own self-developed curriculum much more than in math, and they often rely on more materials compared to teachers of math. And so that has implications, I think, for districts just to try to understand what their ELA teachers are using for their instruction and what kinds of beliefs they have about how to use curriculum materials. I think that varies definitely by subject area. And from the newest survey we have put out, we're going to be putting out a report soon, we have some evidence that science teachers in particular are getting much less guidance than ELA and math teachers about how to use curricula. And they're also more likely to say that their professional learning opportunities focused on curricula are not as helpful as they'd like them to be. So all this to say that I think there are differences by subject area, and it really, it's something we need more research on so we can really understand what teachers are doing in order to support them better, because they're all doing different things depending on grade level, a lot of other variables.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to respond, but if not, I have a question for Rachael. So Rachael, we all know that the large...
Sorry, I think Kat might have been wanting to jump in.
Oh, were you? I didn't see. Kat, did you have something you wanted to say? No?
No?
No. Okay. All right. So Rachael, we all know that the large majority of teachers use supplemental curriculum materials, ranging from, you know, the book in the back of the room to Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers. What is the role of states and districts in supporting teachers' supplementation, or is there not a role that those organizations should play? And how do you think that teachers can supplement well?
Yeah, it's a really important question. Going back to Julia's initial point about it's how things actually unfold in classrooms that matters most to student achievement. I think it's helpful here to consider what's driving supplementation when it occurs, because it can occur for a lot of different reasons. There's obviously, I think, an ideal case where a teacher is using a high quality core curriculum set of materials. It's well aligned. It has lots of supports for English learners, for students with disabilities, for students with unfinished learning, all kinds of students. But of course, it's not going to fully meet the needs of all students in that teacher's classroom. So the teacher is building on that curriculum, understanding the design features, what is essential in that curriculum and what can be tweaked without lowering expectations, and making those choices to supplement in ways that work for their students. In that case, I think curating and helping folks match supplements with core materials in ways that form a coherent whole can be super helpful for our teachers. There are also a couple of scenarios in which less desirable supplementation is going on. Sometimes this is because teachers are presented with a new curriculum without the sufficient time to dig into it, understand it, study it, see how their students, with all their diverse backgrounds and needs and strengths, and master that curriculum. And so unintentionally, or because they don't have any other recourse, they may water the curriculum down or replace key parts of it with supplements. We see this in ELA where texts get watered down to below grade level, so students are denied access to grade level texts, right? Those kinds of tweaks are not as helpful, obviously, to students, and I really think the biggest thing that systems can do in that case is to give teachers time to dig into the materials, because teachers, it's incredibly hard to turnkey someone else's lesson plan. I've tried to do it. It's terrible. And so that's when things start to break down. But if teachers really have the time and the professional learning opportunities to collaborate and plan and think about, all right, what about this lesson is not going to work for this student? And how can I supplement in ways that really build on the core curriculum rather than undermining it or distracting from it? That's what teachers need, and that's what students need. And so, I mean, this is becoming a dead horse, but I think just giving teachers time to do that is so important and can make sure that their supplementation, which is necessary and part of their job of implementation, is really in ways that serve students and make teachers feel good about what they're doing with their core curriculum.
Yeah, there's one theme I've heard repeatedly is about time, right? The importance of time. And we all have so much time now that we're working from home, right? Everyone just has all the time in the world. Julia, it looks like you wanted to chime in with something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think, what Rachel's been saying again and again, it's really hard. Implementing standards aligned, good curricula is really hard. And so I think that what she's saying about teachers supplementing for so many different reasons, they may be supplementing because they're identifying a really clear gap that's important to fill. They may also be supplementing because they don't understand an activity in the curriculum. We have some evidence from our surveys that teachers are really supplementing a lot when they're serving low-income students that are most likely to be lower achieving, particularly in English language arts. At that level, there are so many, for English language arts in particular, there are so many intervention materials being used. And teachers in high poverty schools are seeking out those intervention materials for ELA in particular even more. And so I think this just all means that it falls to districts and schools and states to think about what kinds of advice to give to teachers so that they're supplementing appropriately.
All right, thank you. And I think probably the last question before we start getting into the questions from the audience, thank you, I see so many great questions in the question box, is going to be for Kat. So Kat, in my own research, I found that the presence of large numbers of EL students can affect the textbook adoption decisions that districts make. What should districts with large numbers of English learners be looking for when they're making textbook adoption decisions? Or what kinds of curriculum supports do teachers need as they're implementing curriculum materials in settings with large proportions of English learners?
Yeah, thank you, Morgan. This is a really important consideration, and I see it emerging in more and more districts as their English learner populations grow. Selecting a curriculum that considers the needs of English learners in the intent and design of the resources and materials, instead of as an afterthought, is the first critical recommendation there for districts that serve English learners. So selecting a curriculum that comes with aligned EL materials and supplements is a good first step. A good second step is to review the textbook through the lens of cultural relevance to the students served in the district. If you have a high population of students from a certain country, see if you can find something that's culturally resonant for them. Can students see themselves in the text? Does the text contain culturally relevant perspectives to help English learners make personal connections to the information, just like their non-EL peers can? So the more we can support making those connections through instruction and curriculum and supports, the better we can help our English learners activate their own background knowledge to access information and instruction and lower their affective filter. Educators can use curriculum as a springboard and add additional activities and supplemental materials at their professional discretion. But a solid foundation in the curriculum and the textbooks helps ensure that educators with limited formal instruction and meeting the needs of specifically English learners can still succeed and deliver high quality standards-based EL instruction through the use of a curriculum that considers the needs of English learners in its overall design and development. So, for example, our ELP standards carry the DNA of all the college and career ready standards and clearly describe how to instruct, support, and recognize a progression of English language development across 10 clear and accessible standards. And the connections between the ELP standards and performance expectations are similarly clear, easy to interpret, and visibly related to ELA math and next generation science standards. So this makes ELP standards accessible not only to EL specialists, but to the content area educators and school administrators. And this better helps to support ELs in those districts with those populations. Accessible, intuitive standards support educators' efforts and to adjust and pinpoint instruction, either to a student or group of students, at their specific performance levels in the language domains of listening, reading, speaking, and writing. And then in terms of textbook adoption, a culturally relevant curriculum that focuses on college and career ready standards and the use of academic language and discourse would, for example, already be appropriate for the use with the ELPA 21 ELP standards because of those embeds. Curriculum with supplemental activities and resources that include English learners in classroom activities should be prioritized, and inclusion should not be an afterthought. For curriculum supports directly, ELPA 21 recommends educators focus on differentiating instruction, and we spend a lot of time in our professional learning on this. We train both content classroom teachers and EL instructors in the tools and strategies that will facilitate English learners access to and achievement of academic content and academic English. So differentiation concentrates on distinguishing the academic content from the language skills needed to address it. And then we use a research-supported differentiated instruction technique and research-based academic English language framework to teach our educators to identify academic English, distinguish it from the content, and then purposefully address both in their instructional practice. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Your comments remind me that one of my students actually wrote a dissertation about English language learner curriculum materials in studying Texas and school district practices in Texas and administrators' thoughts about the role of curriculum materials for English language learners. And there were some really promising places that clearly had foregrounded their EL community and thinking about curriculum materials, and some quite alarming comments about the role of curriculum materials for English learners. So absolutely a very important issue. So I have more questions on my end, but I think we have some questions from the audience. So Shira, I don't know if you have, if you're ready to start posing those, but go for it.
All right, great. Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. There's some really interesting questions here. So let's start with a question for Julia, but everybody just chime in if you have something to add. So first of all, how do you see the connection between curriculum frameworks or standards implementation guidance and instructional materials?
Sure, I'm sorry. I think you cut out at one point. Who are you directing that question to? Is that to me?
Oh, I'm sorry. To you, Julia. Yeah. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
Would you like me to repeat it?
Yeah. Could you repeat it?
Of course. How do you see the connection between curriculum frameworks or standards implementation guidance and instructional materials?
Oh, you're muted.
I think that Rachael, I think that Rachael actually talked a little bit about that, and that standards in themselves are not curriculum, and curriculum frameworks are not curriculum either. You know, and I think in a good curriculum framework, you're pointing them towards good published curriculum materials that cover, the full amount of information teachers need for a course, lessons that are scaffolded and, develop students learning over time. I don't know if maybe Rachael might have something else to add to that, or other people, other panelists.
Yeah, no, I think I kind of just build on what Julia was just saying and what I was saying before. I think the two of the big things that curriculum does that standards and curriculum frameworks don't necessarily is they organize instruction, right? They give that sequence of learning experiences. And I'm speaking primarily from an ELA lens, and I know very well that the ELA standards do not serve as organizers of instruction. That's not their job. It's not what they do. If you use them to organize instruction and have a big lesson on the main idea and then another lesson on craft and structure and author's purpose, it's not an effective way of instructing. So that organization, both within years and across years, I think is really important. And then the accessibility piece that a lot of us have talked about. Standards are outcomes. They don't provide teachers with all the means they need to get students to those outcomes, regardless of what barriers they're facing. Teachers have a lot of expertise, but going back to the earlier point, right, that is a big task. Curriculum can give them the tools they need to bring the student to the outcomes in the standards or the curriculum framework. So they're outcomes, they're not curriculum.
Great. Thank you to you both. So let's move on to another one. This one I'm going to direct at Kate. Can you talk about the role of embedded or formative assessments in the instructional materials and how those inform instruction and how materials are used?
Sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. So I look at it through the lens of being a reading specialist and like the use of formative assessment that's ongoing in the practice. And I think that model can be utilized throughout the student's day, right? So we look at the task that they're asked to do, and then we analyze how they are able to perform the task, and then from that we create plans of either extending that learning or remediating that learning. And so that is something that is secular, and it's something that teachers gain over time. I think that we start our careers and we have some good practices that we are engaged in, but I think that it's through the learning throughout our careers that we are able to really discern and become expert practitioners. And I think it's through, I keep on saying the same thing, but it's so important, collaborating together and taking a look at student work and taking a look at videos of what students are doing and how they process information, and using that to really gauge and respond to students in the moment, but then also the next day and the next day. And so I think that to me is everything is a formative check, right? You're looking at it observationally. You're doing exit tickets. You're using it. You have it over your desk as you're creating your next week's lessons. And it's iterative and it's continual.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. The next one I'm going to direct at Kat. So you gave this lovely description at the end about that was really specific, kind of about what instructional materials for English learners could look like, and kind of what best practice was around that. So there's a question specifically about culturally relevant curriculum and kind of what are the best policies in practice. So I wonder if you can kind of expand on that a little bit to provide an example of what that might look like.
Yes, let me pull the question up. I'm sorry, I'm a little hearing impaired. There we go. And you can hear me? Okay, so I would say to best practices for classes with students from diverse cultural backgrounds is really try to find common experiences that the students can relate to each other on, and that let students access instruction in the ways that their non-EL peers can access that instruction. We want to be really thoughtful about removing barriers that we might not even see from a monolinguistic standpoint that our multilingual students have to face. There are places where they need different support and scaffolding to help them have the same classroom experience as their non-EL peers. In terms of best practices, there's some information in the What Works Clearinghouse and some evidence-based resources that can be curated for classroom use. There's quite a bit out there. I don't want to necessarily call out any one particular curriculum or set of resources, but trying to find those common experiences that allow students to relate not only to the material, but to each other, and to familiarize themselves in that way is a really critical impact to have. Thank you for the question.
Great. So, and Morgan, just time check, maybe one or two more?
Yes, yeah, probably one, no more than two more.
Okay, great. So the next one I'm going to direct at Rachael, but maybe everybody chime in. I think everybody maybe has a different perspective on this that might be useful. But there's a question about districts promoting, the question answer called it curriculum by Pinterest, but maybe we can more broadly think about that as supplementing from alternative websites like that we might not, maybe Teachers Pay Teachers or Pinterest, and kind of what that looks like in terms of district support for helping teachers choose materials, and also what we know about how teachers are using those in the classroom.
Sure, yeah, and the wording in the question was, what evidence do we have that districts are promoting curriculum by Pinterest versus well-designed research-based curriculum? So I wanted to give that kind of specific wording approach. I want to be clear, I don't think district administrators or teachers or anyone are walking around saying, hey everyone, let's use Pinterest, that's a great idea. I do think a couple of other things are happening that push toward that sort of cobbled together approach to curriculum. One has a lot to do, I think, with teachers' professional identity. And so I'm coming from the lens of a former high school English teacher. And this was a while ago, but when I came out of my prep program, I was very clearly indoctrinated to believe that if I did not create my own curriculum to some extent, I was a bad teacher. Right? The craft of creation or putting together pieces was really essential to my professional identity. So I think that's one for, it's not districts, but I think that's a clear force that is in certain grade levels and subject areas especially, pushing teachers away from the kind of comprehensive core curriculum approach. It's threatening to their identity as professionals and teachers in many cases. I think a lot of district curriculum honestly just falls under the radar. So I've had assistant principal tell me, you know, if you at the state could just convince everyone that curriculum is really important, that would be super helpful. I've had a school board member say, we never talk about curriculum except when we talk about health because of sex ed and there's controversy. And so I don't think it's so much promoting the cobbled together approach as a lack of pushing toward, hey everyone, our comprehensive curriculum is going to be a real priority in our district at the system level, and these are all the ways we're going to support it. Last thing really quickly is just other pieces that hook into curriculum, such as walkthrough protocols, evaluation rubrics. Those are often not designed. They're getting there. There's been a lot of progress recently, I think, in aligning those to evaluate and incentivize teachers' use of the core curricular materials. But a lot of them, until very recently, had very little to say about that. And so, understandably, teachers are in this incoherent environment, not incentivized to stick to one curriculum and really dig into it. It's not a surprise that they look elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. So we are up against time. Thank you to Shira for helping us identify those questions, and thanks to our panel for their comments and their answers to the questions. We just go to the last slide for closing logistics. And thank you, of course, to the audience for being here and for asking questions. So I encourage you to take a 15-minute break and join us in the closing session, chaired by Andy Porter and with Linda Darling-Hammond. And if you haven't already registered to get your unique join link, you can visit the URL there. And all of the sessions are being recorded and will be made available on our website as well. So thank you again to our panel and our audience, and I will see you in the closing session.
Thanks, Morgan.